Ivy and Gecko acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. Welcome to Hearts and Minds. Our podcast episodes feature conversations with highly accomplished mining executives and board directors. We'll explore critical themes relating to leadership impact, staff engagement and culture development. So tune in, enjoy the conversations and prepare to be inspired. I'm Alana Bray-White, the Managing Director of Ivy and Gecko, and this is our podcast, Hearts and Minds.
And I just fell into it. And as I fell into it and started to learn more about the mining process, I found I was able to then transfer a lot of the org psych knowledge through leadership programs and into the mining industry, which really sucked it up. The EVP for Regis is really about our culture.
Yep.
We've done 3 culture and engagement surveys in the time I've been at Regis, and our scores are second to none. We have a 90% score of people believing in and understanding our values and ascribing to those values. That's phenomenal. We've got a 75% engagement score, which says most of our people are engaged with the organisation and want to work there.
We would like to advise that at the time of recording, Tim was employed at Regis Resources. However, he has since accepted a new position with Roy Hill. Our guest today is Tim Conversi. Tim is a highly credentialed leader in the fields of human resources and organisational development. His career spans over 20 years' experience in the Australian and international mining industries, working both as an executive and a consultant across a range of commodities. In 2020, after spending 10 years with global major Newmont, Tim joined Regis Resources, a leading ASX gold producer and explorer, in his current position of Executive General Manager, People and Capability. Ivy and Gecko has had the pleasure of collaborating with Tim on a number of consulting projects in recent years. We've always found him to be very relatable, and his sense of humour is never far from the surface. In this episode, Tim goes head-to-head with fellow organisational psychologist David Beilby to lift the lid on some enduring mysteries, including why it only takes one narcissist to change a light bulb. As a former WA state representative in hockey, Tim describes how he transferred lessons in leadership from the playing field to the executive suite. He dives deep into the culture of Regis Resources and reveals why his company has a competitive edge in attracting and retaining the industry's most valuable talent. Keep listening. I'm sure you'll enjoy this one.
Tim, thanks for dropping by the studio.
Pleasure. Thank you.
It's always good to see you. Look, we've known each other for a few years now, and we've got at least 2 things in common, I reckon. We're both org psychs, yep. And I think we've both got a sense of humour. So let me try this one on you. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb?
1, but it takes a number to change the people around them.
Well done. Have a go at this one. How many narcissists does it take to change a light bulb?
None. They get someone else to do it for them.
Almost. Only one, but the narcissist just holds the globe and the world revolves around them. Listen, this podcast is all about leadership and its impact on stakeholder engagement and culture development within the context of mining companies.
Yep.
So the great thing is that we invite executives like yourself and board directors to come on, share some experiences and insights, which with a bit of luck might be of some value to listeners or viewers of this podcast, and they might be able to modify their habits and behaviours to improve wellness in the workplace. So let's start, Tim, if we may, with your backstory. Tell us a little bit about your early years and your family life.
So I was born and bred in Darwin. I was actually born on a remote Aboriginal community called Delisaville.
Yep.
I was born in Darwin Hospital, but I lived the first few years of my life in Delisaville, which is the place where my mum and dad met. My father was from Italy. My mum was from England. So for both of them to meet in a remote Aboriginal community was quite interesting.
Yes.
And then I moved to Darwin when I was about 3 and grew up in Darwin, moved to Perth probably around about the age of 25. So yeah, my early years, my forming years were in Darwin.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's where you gained your first qualification. Am I right? in
No.
the Northern Territory?
I started my university as soon as I left high school.
Yep.
I actually started doing a Bachelor of Laws. I did about 2.5 years of that Bachelor of Laws, then decided I didn't want to be a lawyer.
Yep.
Got into hospitality and just worked in Darwin. Backpacked around Europe for a couple of years. I did the mandatory backpacking around Europe. Did lots of different jobs. I was a garbologist in London, and I did maintenance work with Grosvenor House, worked in Greece.
Yeah.
And then when I went back to Darwin, I got back into studying. I started back into law and psychology, and then transferred to UWA, which is where I actually finished my degree.
So we got three things in common. I too began a law degree and opted out. I found it too dry for me, and maybe it was a combination of that and a bit of lack of maturity and discipline at the time to persevere with it.
Yeah, mine was a little bit more personal and lazy. I thought that once you got your degree, that was it. But then you had to read case law for the rest of your life, and I just didn't. It didn't interest me.
It's not quite Suits, is it?
No, that's exactly right.
Yeah. Was there an event or a realisation in your life, Tim, that proved to be a tipping point in terms of how you thought about yourself and your place in the world?
I've always been quite, I guess, spiritual and reflective, not religious, but a belief in purpose. And that led me in my very early years to do a lot of things like it was called alpha dynamics in the early days, or and then I got into meditation and qigong. And I guess in reflection, it's after studying psychology and working in the field for a number of years, it was about developing a sense of purpose and self-efficacy in the world. So there was no one event, but probably a number of events through my teenage years.
Yeah. Do you still practice meditation?
Yeah, I do qigong every other day. I find it's just a natural part of my life now.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. How does it go? What does it consist of?
Qigong is a little bit like Tai Chi. They're patterns or forms of breathing. So it's a moving meditation. And it's really focused on that mindfulness and centering and breathing.
Yeah. You mentioned purpose, clearly very important for organisations as well as individuals to have a purpose and a meaning in life beyond themselves. What kindled your interest in psychology and specifically organisation design? Because I know you're quite passionate about that.
It's an interesting question because things aren't linear necessarily. So as I was growing up, I played a lot of hockey. As I said, I was into meditation, inner wealth or personal development. And so I took on board roles with state hockey teams as a manager, where I would start to develop things like meditative practice to get people ready to go onto the sports field.
And that was at state representative level?
Yeah, I played state hockey for about 10 years, and I interspersed that with doing management and helping out with those teams. And so I've always been interested in that side of things. After I backpacked around Europe for a couple of years, got back into hospitality, and I ended up working in the Darwin YMCA as a recreation officer. The role I had then was in Darwin, the YMCA in Palmerston had low socioeconomic attendance. It was sort of like a new development. And they had a blue light disco, or they called it Moonies, on Friday and Saturday night. And the kids didn't have, they got sick of drinking Coke and Fanta and whatnot, and they wanted to be a little bit more grown up. So they wanted to make alcohol-free cocktails. So because of my hospitality experience, a friend of mine who was working there brought me in. I taught them how to run a bar and to make alcohol-free cocktails, etc. And that was really successful. The kids loved it. They developed skills which they didn't have. And then I got a job with the YMCA, and we put the program forward as a Cert 1 in hospitality. Yeah. That was federally funded for a year. So we had 2 cohorts of 8 groups per cohort. And to be eligible for the program back then, you had to be long-term unemployed. And what that meant at the time was you couldn't have had a job for the last, I think it was 18 months or 24 months. And so the majority of kids that were on the program were from long-term unemployed. They have second, third, sometimes fourth generation unemployed families. So they came on board for 2 6-month cohorts. I taught them a bunch of skills. I incorporated the team development stuff I was doing in hockey. And by the end of the program, 2 of the kids got full-time permanent positions. So statistically, not a significant outcome, but from a human and societal outcome, just huge for them. But I was doing it based on intuition and gut feel, and I loved it, but I figured I might need to go and learn a little bit more about what was driving it. And that was my kicking point into psychology.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of the representative hockey aspect of your background. And that you must have got a lot from the team, understanding team dynamics on the sporting field and transfer that knowledge and understanding into the business workplace as well.
Absolutely. And high-performing sports teams are great to observe in what they do and trying to transfer their behaviours and their rules or their norms into an organisational setting is something that I continue to do today.
We had John Welborn on our podcast a few weeks ago, Executive Chairman of Regis Resources, and he was a former Wallaby and said an interesting thing. He said when you look at the list of players on a team, it's the leaders, there is multiple leaders. It's not just the person who has a C in brackets after the name. Everybody's got a role to play in encouraging others and
absolutely
encouraging progress towards the common goal. You've been in the mining industry for 20-odd years, I think, Tim. Why did you decide to build your career in the mining industry? And so what appealed to you about it at the time? And why do you continue to work in the mining industry?
I think like a lot of people that end up in mining, it wasn't necessarily a choice. Mining in WA, pretty easy thing to fall into. I did my postgraduate studies. I was doing a PhD at the time, started to do some consulting work with a couple of different groups. They happened to be in mining. That was where the work was.
Yes.
And I just fell into it. And as I fell into it and started to learn more about the mining process, I found I was able to then transfer a lot of the org psych knowledge through leadership programs and into the mining industry, which really sucked it up.
When you're not concentrating on your work, what do you do to relax and recharge?
I've got 2 kids, a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old. So I love spending time with them and my wife.
Yep.
I still do my qigong, my meditation, on a regular basis. I go to the gym 5 days a week.
Yep.
And I find that's a really helpful preventative and from a mental health perspective.
Yeah.
And those things keep me busy.
When you're at the gym, do you reflect on work challenges and problems? Do you process them, or do you sort of draw the curtain and concentrate on non-work issues when you're working out?
I try to use it as a meditative practice. So to put the cup down and give the brain a rest for a while.
Yeah.
But I've always been a naturally good person at switching on and off.
Have you?
And I think a lot of that comes back to the meditation is I go back to an old analogy that I heard many, many years ago around stress and the Western approach to eliminating stress is to try and get rid of it. Whereas that's almost impossible because there's stress in everything you do.
Yeah.
Whereas an Eastern philosophy is, the analogy, if you hold your hand out at arm's length with a cup of water, after a couple of hours, it's going to start to hurt. And that represents stress. So rather than tip the water out, just put the cup down for a while. And then your arm gets better and you can pick the cup back up.
Yeah, good reflection. Everyone's got a different definition of leadership. Tim, what does leadership mean to you, and to what extent do you think are the various skills of leadership innate or learned?
So there's 2 parts to that question. I do believe that there are natural born leaders, but I don't think that precludes everyone else from becoming a leader. I think I know you can learn to be a good leader, but there are some people who are just naturally gifted at it. They were just born with that gift. The way I look at what is leadership is, and having run lots of leadership programs, often one of the reflective questions I ask participants is, what does every leader need to be a good leader? And the answer I look for is followers. So if you don't have people following you, you're not really leading. You might be managing or pushing, but you're not leading. And then the question I ask people is, what do you need in order to willingly follow someone?
Mm.
And then whatever they say, that's what leadership looks like. They want to have purpose and vision. They want to get feedback. They want to feel like they're performing well. So leaders create that environment where people want to follow them.
Yeah, yeah. And brings me to express the point of view that teamwork really is the ultimate competitive advantage in any business. And if you can develop a sense of belonging and safety within a group of people, that helps to relax them, and their true talents and their potential comes out. So, yeah, I have a view that, everybody has the capacity to demonstrate or to choose to demonstrate leadership to some degree. Sure, it helps if you've got some innate personality qualities that support leadership, but I often look at company structures, and very often you see a set of people, a group of people designated as the leadership team, whereas I think, perhaps that doesn't send the best signal to everybody.
Yeah, that's right.
They're executives or they're board members, they're important, responsible people, but everybody can demonstrate leadership. Would you share with us, Tim, some of the challenges and perhaps even failures of your career? What did you learn about yourself, and how did these insights help you become a more effective leader?
Yeah, very, very early on in when I left uni, I got into consulting. I did that for about 10 years. And then I got into working in an organisation. I did that for a little while and then got back into consulting. But in that first FTE type role, as I left, I reflected and asked one of my team members, what could I do differently or better in my next role as a leader?
Yeah.
And without going into all the detail, but I had quite a toxic leader in that organisation. And my belief was that being transparent was the right thing to do. But the feedback this employee gave me was, she said to me, sometimes you make it really difficult to enjoy working here. And I took that as a bit of a kick in the guts, because whilst I was being transparent,
yes,
I didn't have to be transparent about every decision that I disagreed with.
Yeah.
So that was a real learning opportunity for me of what is the role of a leader. And sometimes the role of a leader is to not mislead, but to filter information so it becomes palatable for people so they can still turn up and do a good job and feel like they're engaged in the organisation.
Yeah. There's a lot of nuance associated with leadership, isn't it? A lot of emotional intelligence that goes into it. And some people find that very difficult, the ability to listen with intent rather than listen with the intent of simply, interjecting and expressing their point of view without really understanding the other person's point of view, and empathy as well.
And I think, David, a lot of it comes back to symbolism as well.
Yeah.
I remember running a leadership program with a maintenance superintendent, and he was really struggling at the time with getting his people to do what he was asking them to do and to turn up and be engaged at work. And I noted to this particular person in a training program, it was done on site, but we were in the training facility, but he turned up each day in his overalls. And I said to him, why are you wearing overalls? You don't get on the tools anymore. So the purpose of overalls is to keep clean. And his response was really interesting. He said, well, it makes me feel like one of the boys. And I said, but you're not one of the boys. You're the leader of the boys now. So maybe reflect on that. And I went back to the site 6 months later, and he was wearing normal high-vis clothing.
Yeah. And
that was a journey for him to understand the symbolism of sometimes leaders have to be prepared to actually get out there and lead and sell the message and own the difficult conversations or own the difficult messaging because that's part of the gig.
So how would you summarise then, Tim, how you coach somebody who has supervisory or team building responsibility to develop those key aspects of their natural style so that they become more effective in encouraging people to modify behaviour? It's a hard ask for a lot of people.
It is a hard ask. I really like a tool that I use a lot, which is the Insights Discovery model. It's a proprietary model, and there's lots of models like it that are good out there on the market. but it provides a really good talking point to communication style, and communication is very closely linked to thinking styles and behaviour. So using those sort of tools as a conduit into the conversation, I find is very effective. But I also find my approach to organisational development over the years has really skewed into a stratified systems approach or a requisite organisation model. And within that model, there are things that leaders should be doing in order to lead effectively. And provided their personality or the temperament is, T-1 is acceptable to work with or gets on with other people, it's really about showing up and doing those particular behaviours. So when I do coaching in the workplace, it's really targeted around how are you assigning tasks for your team? How are you creating a line of sight for your team? Are you providing feedback and coaching for your team? As opposed to maybe life coaching or personal coaching. It's more about action-based coaching.
And now we take a short break to acknowledge our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Halo Civil Engineering. Halo is a multidiscipline civil contractor that specialises in the delivery of complex civil projects across defence, infrastructure, energy and resources. A West Australian company committed to delivering dynamic solutions with a focus on zero harm, while having a positive impact on their industry, clients and the people they serve. For more information, search for Halo Civil Engineering on socials or visit halocivil.com. If you'd like to inquire about sponsoring an episode of Hearts and Minds, please reach out to us on LinkedIn or via email info@ivyandgecko.com.au. Ivy & Gecko is a leading Australian talent and organisational consulting firm. We specialise in providing executive search and board consulting services to ASX small and mid-tier explorers, developers and producers in the gold and critical minerals industries. As the only executive search and leadership consulting firm to be admitted membership of the Minerals Council of Australia, Ivy & Gecko is uniquely resourced to advocate for the interests of our exploration, project development and mining clients.
We all know that if people are engaged, they tend to apply more discretionary effort beyond the minimum required in their work. And when that happens, it can be a game changer. All of the business metrics, productivity, safety, innovation, ultimately profit, go in the right direction. But maintaining morale and maintaining engagement is very often difficult, particularly when businesses have specific setbacks. And Tim, I'm thinking of the highly publicised Section 10 ruling on your McPhillamys project. In the context of how you maintain morale and teamwork in that disappointing situation, how do you go about it, you and your colleagues?
Specifically in regards to McPhillamys, we are very fortunate that we have a very strong leadership team over there. And it's quite a close team that's been working together for a long period of time. So that's a mitigating factor in terms of the stress. You can't get rid of the stress, but it's how that team comes together to engage and talk about the stress or the unknowns. So the other part of that is making sure that we're communicating what we know when we know it and engaging with them regularly. And I find that has been the most effective in keeping that team's head up and engaged in the work that they're doing. But we are very blessed that team is a very dedicated, hard-working team.
Yeah. Look, you've got a highly respected board and executive leadership team, which is always a nice box to be able to tick when you're appealing to high-quality talent in the marketplace. When you are considering hiring an executive or a key manager, how do you pitch your company to them? What is the employer value proposition specific to Regis?
So the EVP for Regis is really about our culture. We've done 3 culture and engagement surveys in the time I've been at Regis, and our scores are second to none. We have a 90% score of people believing in and understanding our values and ascribing to those values. That's phenomenal. We've got a 75% engagement score, which says most of our people are engaged with the organisation and want to work there. When you do and get anecdotal feedback from the organisation, as we do quite often, people often use the term family. That people at Regis tend to look out for each other. They get on well, and there is that sense of community. So my biggest challenge is not getting in the way of that, is keeping that going.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of our EVP. We don't pay the most. We don't have the longest life of mine. We're not the biggest organisation. But if we can keep a culture that people want to work in, I think that's a great EVP.
You raise a very good point about culture. I think the strength of a culture and not the company's size or hard assets determines the ability to adapt and overcome adversity and innovate. So culture is key and very often comes before strategy. Unless you've got the culture in place, it becomes very difficult to grow a business successfully. Who's responsible for developing the culture of an organisation?
I think it goes back to the leaders. But when I say leaders, to your point earlier, leaders aren't just the board or the executive or the management team. It's everybody in the organisation. So everybody in the organisation understanding, and we call it line of sight at Regis, where we're going, what we're about, and what our values are. And then behaving in a way that reflects those things and supports those things. Fundamentally, it is the executive team that sets the tone. And we have a process for doing that at Regis where we set a 3-year plan, which is our strategic plan, and that cascades down into an annual plan. And like a balanced scorecard approach, feeds down into individual performance objectives, etc. But creating that vision and that line of sight and link to it is paramount.
So what are the observable features of a healthy culture, and where do derailers come from, and what do derailers look like?
I think derailers can sometimes be people in the organisation, and people that don't fit into the organisation's values and the organisation's behaviours. They often become derailers, but they often, to my experience, self-select out of the organisation. So that's a critical component to it. I think having a set of corporate values everyone's got them now. Having those values identified as behaviours is fairly common. What we do is we ask teams to identify what are the behaviours that they believe reflect our values, and then come back on a regular basis to review and reflect on how well they're performing against those behaviours.
In your experience, do most directors and executives genuinely understand the impact of culture on achieving business strategy, or do you think there's still a lot of lip service being paid to it?
I think there's a lot more now than there used to be. I think, with the internet and smartphones and experience, people understand the impact of culture on a company's performance. So I believe it's growing, but there are still pockets where people need more information. Oftentimes I find it's not a lack of desire, it's a lack of knowledge in understanding what you need to do to create an organisation's culture and to make it strong.
Values are often the basis of culture. Should a company's reward system reflect compliance with or support for corporate values? And if so, how should it do that?
Absolutely. So I'm a strong believer in values and, more importantly, the behaviours that reflect those values. And we do a lot of work about, one of our values is respect. Respect can look very different depending on your background, who you are. So getting a team to talk about what does respect look like for us is the value. So we do that with each of our values. In our performance management system, it's called the Individual Performance Objective and Development process, or we call it iPod. And we do that on an annual cycle with a mid-year review and end-of-year review. We ask every employee in their teams to identify what the behaviours are they're going to focus on as a team to reflect those values to achieve their performance, and then get feedback on it. So it's well and truly a part of our performance management from a performance objective perspective, and we encourage people to do mid-year reviews, but also quarterly reviews with their teams.
If we look at some of the industry opportunities and challenges, Tim, there's always plenty of business challenges, reducing cost bases and navigating approvals processes and so on. But for established gold producers like Regis Resources, the good news is the price of gold keeps on keeping on. It's going through a very sustained period of growth. That aside, there's a lot of talk about the industry having past social and environmental failures that have created a trust deficit and an image problem. Do you have a viewpoint on this? And if so, how could the mining industry do better to attract and re-engage young professionals who might be a bit turned off by the industry?
Yeah, there's a couple of recent cases that are pretty high profile in other organisations. My experience is that most mining companies that I've been involved with do a lot of work in that space and are genuinely committed to doing work in that space. So I think the biggest issue that we have or challenge that we face is how do we get value for that effort and how do we promote that more amongst the broader community? And part of that is getting young people, kids, to do tours of a site, to see what a site actually looks like, that it's not as scary and it's not what it all looks like in the paper and what the stories say, and to look at what the opportunities are in the mining industry. A couple of weeks ago, our CEO and MD, Jim Beilby, gave a speech at a talk at the WA Mining Club, and he spoke about his early experience as a vacation student, and it just demystifies the whole mining process. And I think there's a lot of cloak and dagger out there around what mining is and isn't, based on maybe what the culture was 40, 50 years ago. But the culture I see in mining is a pretty positive one. I think other industries could learn a lot from it.
Yeah. I was in the room when Jim Beilby spoke and I was very impressed. He's a very relatable person, and he put up images of him as a teenager and a young person in the industry. And I remember at a point the audience applauded and some people stood up when he advocated for the industry as, being so critical to our community and our economy. So he did that extremely well and in a very relatable way. Tim, it's your turn. Do you have any questions for me before we go on to the rapid fire questions?
Oh, David, I think you work with a lot of different mining organisations.
Yeah.
Recruiting a lot of different roles. What do you see as the critical components of people that are successful in a mining industry or mining career?
Look, I'm not an engineer or a geo or a metallurgist. The relatively easy part, I think, Tim, of any recruitment process is identifying people who have the right technical credentials and experience. It's relatively easy to discover that and validate it. What you can't see when you look at a LinkedIn profile or a CV, of course, are the personal qualities of somebody. You can make a judgment of it. You can do it intuitively or through science-based methodology. You can try and understand what makes a person tick, what their values are. In my experience, that's the challenging aspect of the process. And doing that level of due diligence, once you've qualified a person on technical grounds, is the value that a recruiter adds to the process. And that's hopefully why clients use us. Otherwise, it would be a pretty mechanical process of getting a long list of people. We often say in our business, long list on competencies, short list on evidence of relevant achievements, and higher on values. So hopefully that answers the question. It's both an art form and a science. And the more you do it, the higher the hit rate, effectively. Thanks for that question. Some rapid fire questions for you, Tim. Are you ready?
I think so.
When you think about people who have shown great leadership, whether it be in business or the arts or sport, who is the one that you most admire and why?
The person I most admire is a guy called Jeff Huspany. Jeff was the RSVP of Newmont APAC around about 2009 to 2012. Jeff was just a very personable individual. And I guess the reflection I have is I was walking through Denver Airport probably about 4 years after Jeff had left in the position with another two people from Newmont, and we hear this this guy call out from across the security area, "Hey, you guys!" And Jeff comes over. He remembered our names. He remembered our wives' names. He remembered our children, and he remembered our team members. And that's exactly what it was like to work for him. Jeff would walk past you in the office and stop and say hello.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't just be, "Oh, it's a nice sunny day." He would ask questions which show that he remembered and cared about things you'd spoken about.
Yeah. So the care was very evidently genuine.
Absolutely.
It wasn't synthesized. And I know what you mean. That makes such a big impact when people remember personal things about you and have a genuine interest in finding out from you. What's the best career or business advice you've been given, and who gave it to you?
Years ago, before I joined Regis and Newmont, when I was consulting predominantly in Africa, I was consulting with a group called Nettlewood to a company called Lion Ore, which was bought out by Norilsk Nickel. And I was in Botswana, and we were just welcoming a new member to a site leadership team for Tati Nickel. And Peter Breeze, who was the CEO of Lion Ore, was also leaving the organisation. Pete was really successful, had worked at very senior levels for many, many years. And I said to Pete, quite innocently, "So Pete, what's next on the agenda? Have you got something to go to?" And Pete said, "Oh, Tim, I think I'll be okay for a while." I said, "Well, I'm not questioning that, Pete, but what's next in your journey?" He said, "I don't know. I've had lots of different jobs, but I've only worked for one or two people." And what he learned early on in his career was to find the people he worked well with and then follow them. And the person that he had sort of found and followed was the chairman of the board, Don Bailey. And that was a piece of advice that I remember. It's not the organisation or the paycheck or the level. It's making sure you're working for someone who you can respect and work hard for and be committed to.
Yeah, it's so true. And the reverse side of that coin is that people join companies and leave bosses. You know, if you have a boss that's not genuinely interested in helping you to develop and realise your potential, then that's, some form of motivation to consider your options.
Yep.
We like to delve a little bit into people's habits. What's your favourite productivity hack? That is, what do you do every day that helps you get the most out of your day?
Breathe. And I say that quite jokingly, but meditation is putting the cup down, breathing, and what's the we can go probably 20 odd days without food. We can probably go a week without water. Can't go a few minutes without air. But we constantly think about food and drink, but we don't think about getting a good breath of fresh air and a really good belly breath.
Yeah.
So that's my productivity hack, is making sure I breathe properly, and things like going to the gym. Healthy body, healthy mind. And neuroscience is showing now the relationship, I think, in the past has been healthy mind, healthy body. I think a lot of it is showing that it's the other way around. If you get your body healthy, you don't have to be able to run a marathon, but physically healthy, the mind follows. The heart and the lungs have a lot to say with how the mind works.
Absolutely. And, I often think there are three basic things in life, good sleep, good nutrition, and good exercise. If you do those three basic things, a lot of the rest looks after itself.
But it's so basic, we don't do it.
Correct. Absolutely right. What have you changed your mind about recently?
What have I changed my mind about recently? That's a really interesting question. It's a rapid fire. I can't give a rapid response.
That's okay. Well, we might come back to that one. What activity bores you the most?
I hate doing work for the sake of doing work that's not going to add value. I love to do work that's going to move forward. If it's just to tick the box, I'll do it, but I find it hard to do.
Yeah, me too. I don't like being busy, but I do like being productive.
That's right.
What excites you the most?
Seeing people thrive and grow. And people, the reason I did org psych at the starting point and not clin psych or developmental psych, people spend the majority of their waking hours at work. It goes back to this self-efficacy. If they feel good, if they feel powerful, if they feel engaged and committed at work, when they go home, it affects every one of their relationships and vice versa.
Mm.
So what excites me is seeing people thriving at work, because then I know they're thriving in their relationships.
Yeah, yeah. If you walked out of this studio into the world of 2054, Tim, so 30 years from now, what do you think would strike you as the most significant difference in the way people live their lives?
Besides spending a limited time outside in the thermo atmosphere, I think it would be the nature of work would have changed. I think COVID gave us a chance to look at something we hadn't really looked at as an industrial society since the Industrial Revolution, which is the 5 and 2 work week and everyone being in the office. There's a lot of debate going around now around the flexible working from home. I don't think that debate has settled. I heard on the radio this morning about an organisation that's moved to a 4-3 standard work week, and they're reporting great results. I don't know what it'll look like at that time, but I think the way that the working week is structured will look very, very different.
There has been a little bit of a migration back to the office, I think, over the last couple of years post-COVID, but certainly not to the extent that everybody is expected, at least in knowledge workers, to be in the office 5 days a week. So I think when we did the research for our book Smart Value last year, we did recognise that many people valued flexible working hours and flexible workplace. It was well up there in the hierarchy. Tim, this has been a good chat. We've learned a little bit about you. Certainly your sporting prowess was something I wasn't aware of. And
long time ago, David.
Yeah, it was, but no, you've learned things from it. So thank you very much for sharing some of your insights with us. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to Hearts and Minds. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a rating or share it with a friend. And don't forget to follow us and connect on social media for updates on all of our upcoming guests. I'm Alana Bray-White, and I look forward to you joining us for our next episode.